So the 7-1 Ohio State Buckeyes college football playoff resume for the first rankings that come out on Tuesday are set. They have a loss to a top 5 team, to the number 1 team in the country right now by 1 point. And they also have, as of right now, as we're recording this video after Penn State, after a 20-13 win over Penn State, a road win over the number 3 team in the country. So it's a pretty solid resume. But there are some other resumes around the country who also are one-loss teams where maybe they have a chance to be higher in the rankings as well. Oregon's clearly going to be number 1 unless something crazy happens with them in Michigan today. And I'm recording this maybe as the Oregon-Michigan game is happening, so who knows? But assuming that Oregon beats Michigan and they're number 1, Andrew, where should Ohio State be in the rankings?
Ohio State should be number 2 because one of the things that we have seen from the College Football Playoff Committee in the past is that wins matter a lot more than losses. And, like, who you beat really matters. There is a really solid argument that Ohio State right now has the best win in the country because they went into a top 5 environment on the road and won. Now, Alabama beat Georgia at home. Okay. Oregon beat Ohio State at home. Okay. Ohio State went on the road to the number 3 team in the country. Now, you could argue Oregon has the best win because they beat Ohio State. You could argue for a couple other schools, I think, and okay, like we could have a debate, but I think Ohio State, when you look at who they've played, when you look at who they've beaten, more importantly, when you look at how they've beaten them, I think, today, 2013, that might not have been as indicative of how close this game really was. I think Ohio State had a chance to jump on them early. Now, they didn't, but I think they had a chance to jump on them early. So, to me, I'm looking at it like I think it should be Oregon 1, Ohio State 2. And then, I don't think you're going to get weird and have unbeaten Miami at number 2 or anything like that. I don't think you're going to get weird and have unbeaten Indiana over Ohio State at this point. Like, I understand Ohio State does have that one loss, but it is to the number 1 team in the country. And then when you stack up who they've beaten, that really matters. And they just won on the road in a very tough place to play. Again, the offensive line, we had a lot of concerns about that. They looked pretty good today. So I just think some of the concerns that you might have had about this Ohio State team after the Oregon game, through the bye week, through the Nebraska game, they didn't answer them completely. They're not solved. But you definitely feel better about it right now than you did 48 hours ago, 24 hours ago. So Ohio State should be number 2. I actually do think they are going to be number 2 as well. That is what I think is going to happen in the college football playoff rankings, and I think we are going to be on a fast track for Ohio State, Oregon, Indianapolis on a rematch, and I think they might be the 1 and 2 teams in the country when they get there.
Stefan, tell us why Andrew is wrong.
Well, I'll tell you why Andrew's right first. I think Ohio State should be the number 2 team, and I think Oregon should be the number 1 team. Again, this is either during or before Oregon plays Michigan. I actually have no idea if that game is going on. I'm looking at the Big Ten scores, and all I can tell you is that Minnesota beat Illinois, so there's that, and Northwestern beat Purdue. So that's all I can tell you in terms of Big Ten scores. I think Ohio State should be number 2. I think they're second best team in the country, lost by 1 point on the road against the number 1 team in the country. All that Andrew said, I 100% agree with. But there's part of me that's just like, is the best SEC team just going to come in at number 2? And does the committee say, hey, Georgia, they struggled in the first quarter against Bama. They made that a game on the road in Tuscaloosa. They went on the road and beat Texas. What have you done for me recently? Georgia's starting to look better. Will they be the number 2 team in the country? There's probably a lot of people who are watching this video who heavily disagree with that, and I am with you. But I am preparing you for when the rankings come out on Tuesday. You're going to see Oregon number 1. You're going to see Georgia number 2. It's very possible. So just be prepared because, Steven, you're about to go on a rant about this because you know that I might not be wrong because of how these things usually go.
I hate it. The SEC has not been very good this year. I hate it. I'm going to go on a rant about it. I'm just going to save it for the pod. So go find Buckeye Talk wherever you find podcasts. I'm going to say it doesn't matter because Oregon's going to be number 1. And that's what matters. Last year when Ohio State was number 1 in the first college football playoff rankings, when Georgia was also undefeated, told me one thing. The Big Ten is going to get the number 1 seed as long as Ohio State and Michigan kept winning. And they were 11-0 and 11-0 when they got on the field together. And what happened? They were 11-0 and 11-0 when they got on the field together. And who ended up being the number 1 seed? The freaking Big Ten team. So if Oregon keeps doing what it's doing and Ohio State's doing what it's doing, whoever wins in Indianapolis is going to be the number 1 seed in the college football playoff. So it doesn't matter. That's all. As long as Oregon doesn't drop the ball at any point in the next 5 weeks, None of it matters. I agree they should be number 2. I agree they might be number 3 because the SEC thing is still a thing for whatever reason, even though the SEC has not been as good as people promised it was going to be. They're not the prince who was promised. They're not. Andrew is. He's the prince who was promised. It just doesn't matter. Oregon's going to be number 1, and that's what they're fighting to get back to. They're fighting to get revenge on Michigan, and they're fighting to get back to Indianapolis to get another shot at Oregon. And if they win that game on a neutral site field after losing by 1 point on the road, they are going to be the number 1 team in the college football playoff, and that's all that matters at this point.
Really quickly, better win, Ohio State at Penn State, Georgia at Texas.
Ohio State, oh, that's a tough one.
And that's what it might come down to.
Better loss, Ohio State on the road at Oregon or Georgia
Ohio
at home
State
against
on the road at Oregon.
I think Ohio State has the better loss. Georgia probably has the better win. I personally just think Texas is a better team than Penn State, and that probably says more about Penn State than Texas. But it'll be interesting to see how they kind of balance that. But I think the quality of the loss you would hope would be taken into account. I know the final score. I mean, Georgia ended up taking the lead late in that game, so it's really hard to say. But like Georgia, for a large stretch of that game, looked like they could not stay on the field with Bama. There was no point in that Oregon game where you were like, Ohio State doesn't belong on the field with this team. There's also the eye test. I mean, Georgia didn't look great against Kentucky.
I think the thing that's not going to play for Ohio State is they didn't look great the game after Oregon when they had 2 weeks, and us being negative probably helps in that situation, and it will hurt Ohio State. But again, we're going to have this conversation on Buckeye Talk.
You also have to take into account the Clemson win because it looks good on paper for Georgia. On paper.
The point is, Oregon's going to be number 1. So if Ohio State avenges a loss that they lost by 1 point on the road on a neutral site game, they're going to be number 1 in the college football playoff as long as they handle this business. The goal was to get through the Penn State game, and they've gotten through the Penn State game. I'm not saying it gets easier. It does for 2 weeks, but it's not going to get easier. But at least it's simpler now. You know everything is out in front of you, and everything you want to accomplish is there. So, sure, 2, 3, it doesn't matter. 2 and 3 play each other if they both get to the semifinals, so it's kind of irrelevant. Yep. But if they beat Oregon in Indianapolis, if they get back to Indianapolis, and both teams have 1 loss, and Georgia also has 1 loss, I think the Big Ten gets the number 1 seed because Oregon has looked by far like the best team in the country so far. We'll continue to have this conversation on Buckeye Talk. I'm Steven, that's Andrew, that's Stefan. Get the text 614-350-3315. Ohio State 20, Penn State 13. That's 6 wins in a row for Ryan Day over James Franklin. Make of that what you want.